This is 5 on 20 News, where the news is bleak and the newscaster's on Zoloft. I'm Alex Kack. It's Monday, May 8th, and we're coming to you live from the Creative Tucson studio in downtown Tucson. First, we're going to talk local headlines. A handful of states, including Arizona, are considering legislation to protect free speech on American college campuses. The bills differ from state to state, but are all based on a model written by Arizona libertarian think tank, the Goldwater Institute. Arizona's law would require that public universities remain neutral on political issues, prevent them from disinviting speakers, and impose penalties for students and others who interfere with guest speakers. The legislation comes after a few high-profile incidents where conservative speakers have been protested against on various U.S. campuses. This includes protests against Milo Yiannopoulos, who spoke at UC Berkeley, an event that ended with a minor riot, and Ann Coulter, whose UC Berkeley appearance was canceled because the university feared a Milo-like incident. Attorney Jim Manley, who co-wrote the bill, says that the law serves as a reminder that universities are funded by the public and shouldn't be forced to subsidize speech that they disagree with. He also claims that the universities have been slow to discipline students who interfere with these events. Critics say that the law itself would violate free speech because it stifles criticism. Free speech would be chilled because students would fear being disciplined for simply disagreeing with a speaker's political views. The Goldwater Institute is preparing to roll out their next bill, which they call the really free speech law, which allows muzzles to be used on overzealously progressive college students. Former Sheriff's Department Chief Deputy Chris Radke was sentenced to a year probation for stealing public money for personal use. Radke was also fined $3,000 and given 100 hours of community service. He pleaded guilty in federal court on February 10th to theft of public money. Radke was also facing 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering and 6 counts of theft concerning programs that receive federal funds. The case stems from the funding of a coffee shop run by Radke's daughter. Radke was found to have used money intended for public programs to finance the coffee shop. Ironically, Radke will now spend his days sitting in a coffee shop, nursing a small coffee, and complaining about how politicians are all corrupt. Northwest Healthcare and United Healthcare have reached an agreement after months of delayed action. On Saturday, the 2 hospitals agreed to keep open all Northwest Healthcare facilities, urgent care locations, and physicians in the United Healthcare network. The 3-year agreement will continue uninterrupted healthcare services for those enrolled in a United Healthcare plan and are being treated at a Northwest location. Last week, talks stalled, which affected about 46,000 patients in Tucson. These patients were worried they'd have to change doctors or find a new hospital, but the agreements put those worries to rest. The deal is also retroactive to May 1st for those who were treated at a Northwest facility. Tucson area patients sighed a breath of relief before immediately finding out that Congress is likely to take away their health care anyway. In late Friday, the Arizona legislature passed a $9.8 billion spending bill that includes a host of additional education funding. The budget includes $1 billion for universities to borrow for new research facilities and building maintenance. It also includes $1,000 raises for K-12 teachers in the state, and expands all-day kindergarten and early literacy programs for schools in low-income areas. Now, teachers in high-performing schools would also get a bonus. And Governor Doug Ducey said that the budget prioritizes education, all without raising the taxes for the people of Arizona. Some Democrats were disappointed with the amount offered for teacher raises. They wanted a 4% raise instead of the 2% over 2 years that's ordered by the budget. And even with the $1,000 raise, Arizona teachers would still remain some of the lowest paid in the country. The raises will cost about $34 million per year, and then $68 million next year. $37 million will be given to the highest performing schools in the state, while $8 million will be given to expand all-day kindergarten. The university bonding program almost stalled the bill among Republicans in the state. This would allow universities in Arizona to borrow $1 billion for research facilities and building maintenance. And eventually, 17 Senate Republicans backed the bonding measure due to sweeteners. This included $1 million in new money for so-called Freedom School programs at Arizona State University and the University of Arizona. These programs, which are largely funded by the libertarian Koch brothers, promote free market politics and principles. And last year, Freedom School programs received $5 million from the state. Republicans also were able to negotiate a ban on universities hiring contract lobbyists. Democrats offered some late-in-the-game amendments, including a higher teacher raise and cuts to corporate tax credits, but none were approved. Republicans said it was too late in the process, and they told Democrats to come back when they've got Koch money. 56% of college graduates in Arizona are in student debt. That's according to a recent study by the Institute for College Access and Success. The average debt amount for Arizona graduates was $23,780, which was lower than the national average of $30,000. Arizona was ranked 43rd in the highest average amount of debt and 36th in the proportion of students with debt, according to the study. It used data from 1,116 colleges across the country, and Utah was the state with the lowest debt in the United States, with 41% of their 2015 graduates having student debt. There, the average debt amount was a little below $19,000, and the highest debt amounts went to New Hampshire, where graduates have an average $36,000 in debt. 76% of the state's 2015 graduates had student loan debt, but to look on the bright side, you can still get a hell of a latte. Arizona Senator Jeff Flake is getting an early start to his 2018 re-election campaign. And according to campaign finance documents, Flake raised almost $1.3 million in the first 3 months of this year for his re-election. He also hosted a fundraising event with former President George W. Bush in April. Next month, former governor and presidential candidate Mitt Romney will appear alongside Flake for fundraising events in both Phoenix and Tucson. Republicans are starting to worry about their chances in 2018, as a change of only a few seats can tip the balance of power in Congress. Flake has been cited as a particularly vulnerable candidate in a state such as Arizona that is slowly becoming more blue. Republican Dean Heller of Nevada is considered another vulnerable member of the Senate. Senator Flake already has two challengers in former state Senator Kelly Ward and Deidre Aboud, a Phoenix attorney and community activist. They're both seeking to swing the Senate seat to the Democratic Party. Also, Democratic Rep. Kyrsten Sinema has not ruled out a run against Flake, although she has so far said that she has no plans to run, instead of focusing on raising as much money as possible. Flake might want to consider not voting to take away people's health care. Shockingly, it turns out that people like when Congress actually tries to protect them, as hard as that is to imagine. We do want to correct that Kelly Ward is a Republican challenger. And I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the program you're watching right now. Because here at 5 on 20, we're undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We're going to give you the news as we see it, and we want more people to speak up with us. We need writers, hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, really the whole gamut. The times require a new way of informing ourselves, so join us, do it, and do it now. You can email us at info@creativetucson.org to get involved. And if you think there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, well then shoot us an email to info@creativetucson.org. So we're here for you, and we want to cover all stories from all points of view. So don't be strangers. And now, in national and international news. Emmanuel Macron has won France's presidential election. And the election was closely watched by the world because it held serious implications for France's future in the EU. Macron beat out Marine Le Pen in a landslide vote of 65% to 35%. And Le Pen belongs to the far-right National Front Party, who promised to pull France out of the EU and institute harsh restrictions on Muslim immigration. Now, to many, Le Pen was Donald Trump on steroids, and her win would have continued a recent trend of far-right leaders being elected to prominent positions. This trend began with the passing of Brexit last June, which was supported by the country's far right. Now, Macron is a centrist politician, often compared to Barack Obama, who ran under his own party of Marche, meaning forward in French. He supports integration with Europe, speaks fluent English, and aims to represent a third path in French politics. At 39 years old, Macron is the youngest French president in history and is a political newcomer. To celebrate his victory, we assume the French smoked cigarettes outside a cafe and talked about the meaninglessness of it all. Leaked documents show that the Trump administration aims to impose large cuts on the agency tasked with battling the opioid epidemic in the United States. The documents obtained by NPR are drafts from the White House and were sent to the director of the National Drug Control Policy. It says that the White House is proposing that the agency be nearly zeroed out for funding, with a 94% cut. In an email from Director Richard Baum, the proposal is quite pre-decisional and could change. But if implemented, the cuts would mean that the agency would receive only $24 million next year, which is down from their current funding of $388 million per year. It would also eliminate the high-intensity drug trafficking areas grant program and the drug-free community support programs. Now, these programs are popular in states that have been hit especially hard by the opioid crisis. The budget document states that the cuts would, quote, reflect a smaller, more streamlined organization that can more effectively address drug control issues. Donald Trump made battling the opioid crisis one of his central priorities as president while on the campaign. He signed an executive order that promised additional funding to fight the opioid crisis, but critics say that the cuts spelled out in the document would cancel out any positive steps that the administration has made. The administration countered that it hasn't yet taken any positive steps, so that point is invalid. And presidential advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner's family is coming under fire for an elaborate cash for visa scheme targeting Chinese investors. On Saturday, Nicole Kushner-Meyer, the sister of Jared, appeared on stage at an event held at the Ritz-Carlton in Beijing to urge investments for two proposed skyscrapers in the city. There, she told the 100 attendees that if they invested $500,000, that they could become U.S. residents through a controversial cash for visa program. The program issues EB-5 visas, known as the Immigrant Investor Program, or in China as the Golden Visa. It allows foreign investors to receive a visa if they invest in development projects within the U.S. The program has been criticized for being rife with abuse, and the FBI has performed raids to crack down on this abuse. While Meyer waved the promise of visas in front of her captive audience, she also touted her connection to Jared, who holds tremendous influence in the White House. Meyer told attendees that her brother joined the family business as CEO when he moved to Washington to join the administration. This was according to the New York Times, who sat in on the meeting before being ejected midway through. The Washington Post also reported on brochures handed out by Meyer, claiming that her investors could get a visa for $500,000. So it turns out that there was a border wall after all, but it was a metaphorical one made of money. It's no wonder that Trump's favorite film is Citizen Kane. Now, a proposed Texas law would allow adoption agencies to reject Jewish, Muslim, gay, or single parents. 5 other states have similar laws on the books, but the Texas law would be the most sweeping, along with South Dakota's. The Republican-led bill was scheduled for debate on Saturday, but lawmakers got busy with other matters, such as the Kentucky Derby. The law is expected to come up this week, and Republican supporters say that the law is designed to support the religious freedom of adoption groups, who are private and receive state funds. But Catherine Oakley of the Human Rights Campaign said that the law goes against the best interests of the children it's aimed to help. She also says that the law blatantly violates the Constitution by removing the barriers of church and state. And James Frank, the Republican who introduced the bill, said it's designed to address the state's foster care crisis. And he's referring to the over 100 children who died in Texas Child Protective Services last year. By that time, a federal judge had already ruled that the system violates the constitutional rights of these kids by leaving them more troubled after they left than when they came in. It's unclear how violating the Constitution will help repair a violation of the Constitution, but it's no wonder that Franks named his bill the Two Wrongs Make a Right Act. Now, how do you feel about the security of our nuclear weapons being located in Trump Tower? Because according to the Defense Department, the Pentagon is finalizing a lease on an apartment that would house the so-called nuclear football, the device that contains the top-secret launch codes for our nuclear weapons system. The Defense Department wrote in a letter that the lease will not benefit the president or his organization. The White House would not respond to questions about whether similar arrangements were made for Mar-a-Lago, where Trump often spends his weekends. Democrat Jackie Speer from the House Armed Services and Intelligence Committees signed off on the deal after meeting with White House officials. And officials declined to discuss the cost of the apartment and wonder if the landlord will give them a deal. The nuclear football was last seen in February when a Mar-a-Lago guest snapped a selfie in front of an official holding the black case. Since then, the nuclear football has gone on to attract millions of Instagram followers and we hear has been offered a sponsorship by Doritos. And one of the largest threats to the world was banned by the Ukraine on Friday. That's right, actor Steven Seagal, star of such films as Under Siege, On Deadly Ground, and good personal friend of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Ukrainian Security Service forbade Seagal from entering the country for 5 years, and they said that such a decision is made when a person has committed socially dangerous actions that contradict the interest of maintaining Ukraine's security. The move comes after Seagal was awarded Russian citizenship and after he supported Russia's invasion of Crimea, calling it, quote, reasonable. Seagal has a unique interest for dictators, and he's eating lunch with Alexander Lukashenko, considered Europe's last real dictator in Belarus. He's also ridden a horse for the Nomad Games in Kyrgyzstan, another autocratic country, and he took part in the traditional dance of the Chechnyan strongman Ramyan Kadyrov. Steven Seagal is so loved in Russia that his blues band played in a pro-Putin Russian biker club, which kind of sounds like the setting for a Steven Seagal movie. Now, asked about his banning from the Ukraine, Seagal promised to secretly sneak out of the country, tear out the throats of everyone in sight, and then deliver a speech about human rights before the credits roll. This was Alex Kack for 5 on 20 News. Coming up next, Andrew Conalog explains it all.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Andrew Explains It All. My name is Andrew Conlog, and on this segment I talk about something in Tucson or Southern Arizona or Arizona culture and history. And we all learn something from the process, me included. It's edutainment for you and for me. And today I'm going to do something different than I have on the segment before. I'm going to talk about a myth. I'm going to talk about a myth that comes out of the Tohono O'odham and Akimel O'odham creation cycle of mythology. And you might be thinking that's a little different because I usually talk about history, but I'm going to go on a small polemic here about why I'm talking about this and why I think it's actual history before I get to it. I'll try to make it as short as I can. Now, for Native Americans especially, we don't really know much in the Western sense of history of like facts and dates and people do things at times, very scientific sort of approach that we have to history. We don't know much about that for Native Americans, at least before Europeans came. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Most of these cultures did not write down their records in the same way that Western societies do, and in ways that lend themselves to this kind of scientific historiography. Now, the Tohono O'odham do have some written records. They have these objects called calendar sticks, which I don't entirely understand how they work, but that's mostly just because of my own ignorance. But they are written records of a type, although not exactly written records like Western historians would recognize as written records. And also, another reason for not having great history is just because the European colonization experience was violent and people weren't terribly interested in learning about this history until much later, and we're actually sort of trying to annihilate these histories and cultures for a variety of reasons. So we don't know very much in that sense, but we do know these stories that these groups sort of told themselves. And these were more oral cultures. They passed things down orally. And so I think that these can be really valuable ways to learn about actual quantifiable history in the sense that Westerners understand it, basically. And I think myths are actually more of a good faith scientific historical effort than we usually give them credit for a variety of reasons. I mean, when I'm making this analogy in my head, I look at the early Greek myth of like the sun, where the sun was a chariot of a fiery guy going across the world every day. And for me, that's actually fairly decent scientific inquiry if you're thinking about where ancient people were in terms of the intellectual concepts that we have and in terms of the observational tools that we have. I mean, there is a human impulse to know what is unknown. It's universal. We want to explain things that are unexplained. So I almost call that a very early scientific effort that for all the things that people needed to know for their daily lives and taking into account the things that they did know, limited as they were, that's a decent explanation. That moving thing up there is an animate being that has some sort of purpose in doing so. And so I guess what that comes into is that I think mythology they express human and spiritual truth, certainly, but I think they express, in a way, hard factual truths as well. And I think a lot of these early cultures, especially Native Americans, don't really divorce those things from each other. These spiritual and truths of the heart, I guess you could say, about what it fundamentally means to be part of this culture, what it means to be a human being in that spiritual sense from this very hard scientific natural order of things. Because I think Native Americans rightly perceive that we're part of the natural order, so our own spirits and identities and destinies are part of this natural order, so we sort of blend things together. So I think myths are a good faith effort at arriving at history that have elements of literature, for lack of a better word, to them. So I think we should study them in historical context to try to actually see if we can get at some of those facty history things that our scientific conception of history comes out of. Anyway, that's a long explanation of why I think myths are history to preface this story that I'm about to tell. And the reason I went on all that tangent is because I think we're actually going to learn a lot about real quantifiable history from this myth that I'm going to tell you. And the other reason I'm telling it to you is because it's just an awesome story, man. Oh man, is it a cool story. Now, I don't want anybody to think I have anything but respect for the sacredness and the reverence that these stories had and were and are held with. And I understand and I honor that reverence as well. So don't think I'm not being respectful when I just kind of freak out because of how awesome this story is, because it's really a cool story. So here we go, a particular element of the Odam creation myth. Now, the Odam conception of the world came into being as a result of this omnipotent, omnipresent, really unknowable creation figure called Jos, or Jios. And again, I'm probably pronouncing some of these incorrectly, and I apologize for that. Now, I get closer to that one, though, because that's thought to stem from a Tohono O'odham hearing and version of Dios, which is the Spanish word for God. And so this is God. This is this personal and impersonal, just sort of infinite being that brings everything else into existence. And he is just sort of reigning in the background of everything at all times, sort of unknowable because of the gulf of just incomprehensibility of what this being is. And he brings forth a more conventional anthropomorphized God that was referred to as Earth Doctor. Doctor in the sense of, like, I guess what people might pejoratively have referred to as a witch doctor. I've also heard Earth Wizard, like a magical, knowledgeable being. Earth Doctor. And Earth Doctor himself is the one that actually creates Earth, and he creates the first people. And at this same time that Earth Doctor is doing it, these other beings come into creation, these gods, more or less. One is Coyote. Coyote's going to play the smallest part in this story, but Coyote is just ever present in Native American myths and kind of a trickster being. I guess you could say, also with all due reverence, kind of a humorous being. And I think he is supposed to be kind of more or less comic relief, I guess you could say, with all the lessons that you can learn from humor. So Coyote comes into being, and also a more important character for our story is Buzzard. Buzzard is kind of the embodiment of the animal buzzard, but also is a god with human-like attributes who's extraordinarily powerful on his own. And he'll come into play a little bit later. And then there was this being, again, I'm gonna probably mess up the pronunciation, called Itoi, or also known as firstborn or elder brother. I'm gonna call him elder brother. And elder brother is represented with this symbol called the man in the maze. You may have seen the man in the maze. The man in the maze is kind of a popular symbol that comes from this Odom creation cycle. And apparently the man in the maze as a symbol is somehow playing some kind of role on HBO's show Westworld. I don't know if you watch that. I don't myself. I hear the man in the maze is part of that. If you're watching the man in the maze from Westworld, this guy, Elder Brother. And Elder Brother sort of takes on this role as the most present God, I guess you could say, for the people of Earth. Joss is just sort of unknowable, and Earth Doctor, as you'll see, sort of steps back. So Elder Brother is sort of the closest personal link to the divine that people have. But that's going to come later, because first the pangs of creation have to be gone through, because Earth Doctor actually destroys creation a few times. As is just sort of universally true, the people that he creates end up being perverse and deviant and evil in some ways, each time a little differently. And every time, several times, Earth Doctor's just like, these people aren't going to cut it. And he brings down the sky onto the Earth and just bam, everything's annihilated. And he starts over and he makes more people. And he does this a few times, and each time the people are wrong and bad in some capacity, and just bam, done. And the last time that he does that, and he sees that the people are deviant and bad, and he's wanting to destroy the Earth again, for some reason he doesn't slam the sky onto the Earth, and this time he floods it, which is the flood myth is another thing to go back to my history argument here. Flood myths are everywhere throughout human experience, and I think that it speaks to something. It speaks to something either in history, some kind of something happened, or it's some kind of universal truth that we all have that we learned through the flood myth. But anyway, here, it's present here as well, and everyone on Earth drowns except for this group of people that are saved. They go underground, and that's how they escape the flood. Now put a pin in those people, because they're just going to be hanging out underground for a while, and we are going to get back to them, but just as the eons and the time stretches out, those people are just still underground. Now, this is the last time that the Earth is destroyed in a cataclysm, and Earth Doctor makes new people, and these people are referred to by the Tohono O'odham as the Hohokam. The Hohokam means the ones who came before. Now, if you recognize the Hohokam are what everyone now refers to as this group of people that existed before the O'odham, that we see their archaeological remains here, and that disappeared in some way that was cataclysmic on its face, but that we don't really have a great deal of understanding of. And so these are the mythical Hohokam. And the Hohokam are the people that go through these creation cycles, and it's a long and very interesting creation cycle where they learn all the things that are sort of necessary to be humans in this culture. They are introduced to corn and tobacco, and they fight monsters and encounter issues of morality and things like that. And this goes on until they come to a crisis point where they decide that they need to kill Elder Brother. And yeah, they decide they want to kill God, basically. And there's a couple of different reasons for that presented in different versions. There are some different versions of this story, of all these stories, that sort of differ slightly, especially in terms of motivations. I think you learn a lot from the different versions. Even by looking at the discrepancies, you learn a lot by seeing that there's a discrepancy. Now, one version is that Elder Brother was trying to teach them to be good, basically. He was encouraging them to work hard and to be kind and to do good, and they were sick of it. They were sick of him telling them not to be bad, basically. And another version is that it was Elder Brother who was kind of being a mischief maker, and that he would kind of go around their parties and dances and stuff and lure some comely young women away and stuff like that, and so they got sick of that. But for whatever reason, they decide, we got to kill Elder Brother. So they do. They kill Elder Brother. And the next day, he's fine. He did die, but he comes back to life, and the next day he's fine. So kill him again, kill him more brutally. Next day he's fine. This goes on for a while. Each time it's more brutal. The last time they're dismembering him, they're boiling him, they're putting things in different places all around. Next day he's fine, he's back, he recovers from that. And the people decide, well, this obviously is not going to work. How do we kill a god? We better get the help of another god. And so they go to find Buzzard. And Buzzard at this time is just sort of doing his own thing. He's not really very heavily present throughout this creation myth, which is interesting as being one of the original gods. He's just ostensibly kind of living his life in his house on this mountain, which is where they go. And Buzzard is not an evil figure. He's not the devil in this religious conception. He's just another god. And they go talk to him and they say, we need your help to kill Elder Brother. And he agrees. He said, sure, I'll help you kill Elder Brother. And there's another interesting story which just, if you treat this as a piece of literature, it's kind of interesting trying to kind of get into the mind of this character, Buzzard, where he creates this small version of a world in his house, and that just exists for a couple of days, and the people just sort of watch this miniature version of existence that Buzzard brought into being, that shows how enormously powerful he is. He has the capacity to create whole new things even on this small scale, and then eventually he just sort of wraps it up back into the ether and then says, well, I gotta go now, I'll help you out with this. And the next thing that happens, there's one version where he goes to talk to Earth Doctor. Now this is kind of an interesting detail that he talks to Earth Doctor, especially for what will come later, but there's other versions he just sets right out himself, but we'll tell the story that he goes to Earth Doctor. He asks Earth Doctor, how am I gonna kill Elder Brother? And Earth Doctor tells him and explains, you have to get the power of the sun. And so that's exactly what Buzzard does. He flies up to the sun and in some way is able to take into his hands, not the sun itself, but the essential power of the sun. And in some version, he fashions it, or it already exists as a weapon. And in one version, he refers to it as a gun from the sun. Which, a gun from the sun, man. Like, again, I really am not trying to be disrespectful or anything. That is such an amazing image. Like, picture this vulture god with a gun made of a star, and he's gonna go slay this other god. Like, that's amazing. Anyway, now he's got the gun from the sun, and he goes down and he's flying down to Earth, and the Earth starts to get hotter. He doesn't really use the gun in its capacity, it's a gun, it's just its mere presence is slowly just destroying the planet, including Elder Brother. And Elder Brother gets hotter and hotter and starts to die basically from the heat. And eventually he keeps trying to escape it, but Buzzard just keeps coming inexorably down and it gets hotter. And Elder Brother finds this pool that he had often rested at to try to keep cool, but that's not working. And eventually Buzzard gets close enough to where Elder Brother just dies. Now, the rest of the world isn't destroyed. I don't understand the logic to that one exactly. Yeah, it's probably just not for me to decide, that's fine. But Elder Brother dies as a result of this. And he's dead. And he's dead, and he's dead, and he's dead. And he's dead for years, and years pass. And then he's not. He's alive again. He really just can't kill Elder Brother. The sun was powerful enough to kill him for years, but not permanently. And so he's back to life, and now he's mad. I don't know exactly why he was not angry when the people tried to kill him earlier. If you're taking the literature side of it again, I kind of interpret it as the more patient version of Elder Brother, where he is trying to teach him to be good, but now he's mad. And so he is gonna go out for revenge. So he goes down into the underworld, and this is where the version of the story with Buzzard talking to Earth Doctor is interesting, because now Elder Brother is talking to Earth Doctor and saying, I gotta get my revenge on these people. And Earth Doctor is basically like, well, there's some people down there that might help you out with this. And those people that had survived that flood from earlier, who had just been living down in the underworld this whole time for however long this took, are like, yeah, we'll help you out. And so Elder Brother, God, comes out from the underworld, emerges with an army of people from the underworld behind him to take revenge on humanity. And that's exactly what he does. And this cycle is really epic after this. It's long, so I can't really go into it. I'll just gloss over all the really amazing details that happen. Basically, they just go from village to village of these Hohokam, and they take him over. And usually there are fights with chiefs of these villages, and usually these chiefs possess some kind of magic powers. And of course, Elder Brother has magic, but there are other people among the people that come from the underworld that have magic. So there are these wizards duels that are going on, and they just keep winning. I mean, there are setbacks and there are difficulties, but they keep going and going and going. And the timeline is a little inexact in terms of different versions, but basically the way this all ends is that they come to the ocean, they go west and they come to the ocean and they stop at the ocean and they decide that they're going to go back and they're going to go where they originally emerged and they're going to settle there. And then at some point during all this, they find Buzzard. And Buzzard knows that this is not good. So Buzzard tries to fly up into the sky, basically out of existence, like tries to escape out of the plane of reality. And instead of that, he is caught by an eagle and a hawk who are assisting them and bring him back down. And there's a few different versions of what happened next too. One is that elder brother just kills him, just straight up murders him. And it's kind of poignant in that because these people are brothers essentially. And even if they're not literal brothers, they're brothers in this fraternity of gods, and there's now this element of revenge that's come full circle between them. Other versions are that Buzzard survives, but that he's tortured, especially like skin and stuff on his head is chopped off, and that is one explanation for the reasons why modern buzzards look the way they do. They have that bald, gross head because the original avatar of buzzards had been tortured for killing God. And so that's the way it all ends, and these people come back and they settle here. There are still Hohokam in existence, and they sort of blend and merge with these conquered Hohokam. And that group of people that comes out of that conquest and that merger are the Odom. This is the origin story of the Odom as a people. That is who they are. And that's where I'll end with getting back to the history thing, because we don't really know what happened to the historical Hohokam. We do know that they ceased to exist, and we do know that it was in some bad event that there were signs of violence associating with it. But we do have one version of the story where they were conquered by the modern Odom that they then sort of came together and mixed with as conquered and conquerors. Now, I'm not saying that all those things literally happened, but what I am saying is I think there's reason to believe that this was all a good faith effort to describe things that happened in history. So if we look at these myths, we already know in some way what happened, and we should probably take extra respect and consideration in thinking about them, and maybe use them as a guide to find more of that facty history that Western civilization seems to like so much. And with that awesome story under our belt, this is Andrew Explains It All, and I'll see you next time.